Melody often visited the cemetery. Here, in the silence and tranquility, she could entrust all her thoughts and feelings, sitting by her mother's grave. The girl would talk and talk about something, gazing into the distance, and it seemed to lighten her burden. It was as if her mother heard her, invisibly protecting, comforting, and giving her strength. Her mother passed away when Melody was just 10 years old. It was hard for the little girl to bear this loss. Even now, in her 20s, Melody carried that pain in her soul. Only when she came to her mother's grave did she find solace. Melody would come to the cemetery once a month, even in winter. Her father knew about it. At first, he would scold her, fearing for her emotional well-being, but then he realized that such visits didn't seem to cause any harm. He calmed down. Her father, in general, quickly moved on after her mother's death. Within a year, he remarried. At first, Melody didn't accept this new woman, but then her heart, which had endured so much, warmed to Mabel. She even tried to call her mom. She didn't understand why. Only Mabel halted this timid attempt. "What do you mean, Mom?" she said sternly. "My name is Mabel." And Melody, looking into her frightened eyes, nodded in agreement. Indeed, why would she be her mom? She only had one mother. Then she cried and apologized to her mother at the grave, as if for betrayal. Around her, there was silence, the autumn sun gently shining, and then a maple leaf appeared out of nowhere, falling softly onto her head, as if caressing her, as if her mother had touched her. The girl understood that her mother forgave her, or maybe she wasn't even upset. Many years have passed since then. After school, Melody graduated from an economics university and got a job at a trading company. There she met her future husband, Cameron, who worked in the planning department. Things quickly fell into place for them, and soon Cameron proposed to Melody. The first person she shared this joy with was her mother. On that summer Sunday, Melody sat by the grave, telling her mother about her upcoming marriage. Of course, no one replied, but Melody didn't expect any sign. "Okay, Mom, I'll go now," she said with a smile. "Forgive me for coming to you less and less often. So much to do. Don't be angry, my dear. Next time I'll definitely bring Cameron with me. You'll see how wonderful he is." And suddenly, nearby, a magpie chirped sharply. Melody even flinched at the sound. She looked around, and it seemed as if the bird had been waiting for this moment. It flew off a branch and swooped over the girl's head with a rustle. "Darn it!" Melody smiled, attaching no importance to this sign. At home, she told her father and Mabel about her upcoming marriage. "Where will you live?" stepmother asked. "No, Melody, don't take it the wrong way, but we only have a 2-bedroom apartment." "We'll find a place." Melody's father threw a meaningful glance at his wife. "Cameron is renting an apartment now. I'll move in with him, and then we'll get a mortgage," Melody replied. "But that's such a responsibility," Mabel exclaimed. "How will you manage?" "We'll manage," Melody affirmed. "And we'll help." Her father decisively nodded. "We'll help," Mabel agreed. Melody just smiled. Over the years that Mabel had lived with them, she had grown accustomed to her and didn't even take offense at her sharp remarks and words with undertones. Essentially, her stepmother was a decent woman and in some ways unhappy. After all, she never managed to have her own child. She treated Melody fairly well, perhaps even regretting the phrase she once said about her mom. But this topic was never brought up again, so for Melody, she remained just Mabel, her father's wife. She got along well with her dad, thank goodness. And the wedding? Mabel suddenly remembered. We'll need to order a dress, choose a restaurant, find a host, photographer. Oh, there's so much to do. Cameron and I decided to keep it simple, just sign the papers, that's all. Melody shrugged. Why all these expenses? I understand, but a wedding is an expensive affair, but such a day should be special, her father murmured. Melody shook her head and didn't reply. Of course, like any girl, she wanted a dress, a restaurant, and flowers, but Cameron convinced her that all of that was unnecessary. They needed money for the mortgage now. Less than a month later, Melody and Cameron got married. Cameron was a wonderful groom. He was handsome, always polite and attentive, and he wasn't lacking in intelligence. Moreover, he held a good position. Melody, on the other hand, was stuck in the economics department as a mere accountant, while Cameron was destined to become the head of the planning department in the near future. Melody and Cameron registered their marriage at the city hall, and yet Mabel and Roel came to congratulate them. They insisted on going to a restaurant, where they had already reserved a table. The newlyweds had nothing else to do, so they agreed. And in the restaurant, Roel brought up the topic of the mortgage. He asked how much they needed for the down payment, then handed them an envelope. "This is from us," he said, a little embarrassed. "Decide where to spend it yourselves, on the down payment or on your own needs. Well, it's our wedding gift to you." "Thank you, Daddy," exclaimed Melody, then immediately looked embarrassed. "But why? I know you have a small pension. We could manage on our own." "Father knows best. Take it," Roel said firmly, looking at his son-in-law. "And you, Cameron, listen. Don't hurt my daughter. She's my only one. I won't forgive you if you make her cry." "Don't worry, Roel, I love Melody. I promise to make her the happiest," Cameron promised, hugging Melody tightly. Some time passed, and Melody and Cameron managed to secure a mortgage and move into their own apartment. And so began their quiet family life. Amidst all these changes, Melody suddenly completely forgot about her visits to her mother's grave. Suddenly, she remembered, feeling ashamed. She asked Cameron to go to the cemetery with her on the upcoming weekend, but her husband reacted sharply. "Melody, we need to live in the present. To be alive is to be alive. But how long can you torture yourself with this loss?" he said. "Well, it's sort of my ritual," Melody replied. "Is that so bad?" "I don't know, but I don't want to go there," Cameron replied. That night, Melody's mother suddenly appeared in her dream as she remembered her from childhood, young, with a slender waist, long blonde hair. Her mother stood as if in a mist, looking at her attentively. Melody wanted to run to her, but her mother shook her head, turned away and walked off, then turned back and pointed somewhere. Melody looked in that direction, and there was Cameron, cheerful and content. Her mother shook her head again and suddenly disappeared into the mist. Melody woke up with a sense of unease, but then, calming her thoughts, she decided that this dream was a sign. Her mother simply indicated who she should be with. Yes, Cameron was right. She needed to learn to let go of the past. Melody and Cameron had been living together for just over a year. She still worked in the accounting department, while his career was on the rise. As expected, Cameron was already the head of the planning department. Frequent business trips, meetings. Sometimes they could have lunch together in the office. Cameron came home late, tired. Melody tried to please her husband in everything, with a delicious dinner, perfect order, and attention. Cameron liked this situation. "You're my gold, not a wife," he would say with a smile, hugging Melody. And she would respond by snuggling up to her husband. Yes, they seemed to be happy. But one thought troubled Melody more and more. She still couldn't get pregnant. She didn't go to the doctor, hoping that a miracle would happen eventually. But it didn't. Then one day, something happened that turned their whole family life upside down. It was a Sunday. Melody and Cameron decided to spend it at home. Melody baked a pie, and they settled in the living room to watch a movie. Well, he watched with interest, while she pretended to be equally captivated by the plot. In reality, Melody would have preferred to watch a melodrama now, but she didn't want to argue with her husband. The doorbell rang. Melody glanced questioningly at her husband. He clasped his hands in supplication, as this would be the climax of the movie. She sighed, smiled, and went to open the door. Standing in the stairwell was a young, attractive woman, simply dressed, with a thick blonde braid down her shoulder. The girl was heavily pregnant, at least 7 months along. "Who are you?" Melody asked, surprised. "Does Cameron Hansen live here?" the stranger asked timidly. "He does. What do you need?" The girl hesitated, then placed her hand on her stomach. "I need to talk to him." A terrifying suspicion scorched Melody. How she wished she was wrong. And then Cameron peered out from the living room. His cry sounded bewildered. They both turned towards him in confusion. "Cameron, who is this?" Melody asked. "This? I don't know," he mumbled. "Miss, who are you?" The stranger widened her eyes in surprise, then her cheeks flushed pink. "Who am I?" she angrily retorted. "I'm the mother of your future child. By the way, it's going to be a girl." "A daughter?" gasped Melody. "Sweetheart, don't listen to this fraud," Cameron exclaimed anxiously. "I don't know her at all." "You don't know," the girl nervously said. "Then let's get acquainted again. I'm Constance, your classmate. You visited our village 8 months ago to see your mother. You met me on the street, showered me with compliments, and then came to see me in the evening. Should I continue, or do you remember now?" Melody stood still, unable to move. She remembered that Cameron did indeed visit his hometown 8 months ago. His mother lived in a distant village. Melody had never seen her. Cameron said she was ill, so she didn't visit. Melody wanted to go with him then, but her husband persuaded her not to. He said the journey was long, there was no comfort in the village, and Melody had a quarterly report due at work. Cameron supposedly needed to go to his hometown for work reasons, so he combined business with pleasure. But Melody never imagined it would turn out like this. "Cameron, let the girl come into the apartment and rest," Melody suddenly said, surprising even herself. Her husband looked at her with wild eyes, blushed, then suddenly smiled. "Well, let her in since you insist."
Melody stepped aside and Constance walked past her, brushing her slightly with her belly.
"Where to?" she asked. "To the kitchen, you can leave your shoes on," Melody replied. "I wasn't planning to take them off," Constance smirked. "As you can see, it's not very comfortable for me." In the kitchen, Melody poured the guests some tea, sat her down at the table, and then sat down herself. Cameron stood in the doorway the whole time, arms crossed, visibly nervous. To Melody's surprise, she felt calm. Her upbringing simply didn't allow her to be rude to a pregnant woman, even if she was her husband's lover. Lover? It felt a bit wild for Melody to realize this. She couldn't believe her husband had betrayed her. But at the same time, Constance's words sounded convincing, and Cameron suddenly stopped shouting that he didn't know this girl. Melody pushed the teacup closer to the guest. "You drink," she said, "and take some pie." Constance nodded in response, took a sip of tea, and took a bite of pie. "Delicious," she said, then smiled timidly. "I apologize for shocking you, but I don't know what to do." With each passing minute, Constance grew more embarrassed. Apparently, coming here was a spur-of-the-moment decision, and now she didn't know what to do next. Cameron remained silent. Melody was also at a loss, and Constance fell quiet too. The silence lingered. "So, are you sure your child is Cameron's?" Melody finally spoke. "Of course," Constance shrugged and added, "there were no others." "There were no others. Such things happen in your village," Cameron interjected. "Why are you like this?" Constance gently chided. "You know it's not true. Normal people live in our village, and I can't just be with anyone. We were friends in school, then we drifted apart. You went to the city and I stayed. I even got married, but it didn't work out. And then I saw you and lost my mind. I knew you were married, your mom told me. But I couldn't resist. When you left, I sighed with relief. But then I felt that something was wrong with me. The doctor said it's been 5 weeks already. He asked if I would keep the pregnancy. How else? It's a child. It's alive. It would be a sin to get rid of it." "And is it not a sin with another woman's husband?" Melody asked grimly. "I apologize." Constance lowered her eyes, sighed. "Melody, I understand that my appearance is unexpected for you. I didn't want everything to happen like this. I would have never told Cameron that I'm carrying his child. A tragedy happened in my life. I lived with my mom. She was my support and anchor. But a month ago, she passed away, and I was left completely alone. I'm afraid I won't be able to raise the child alone. So I decided to let the biological father know that he'll have a daughter." Cameron snorted again. Melody sat there like a statue, staring blankly. Then she looked at the guest again. Essentially, this unfortunate woman would soon become a mother. Yes, she was flustered. And who was more to blame among them? Melody couldn't care less. But this woman carries Cameron's child if she can be believed. and Melody felt she could believe her. What to do next? "All right, I'll go. Now you know everything, Cameron. I have nothing to do here," Constance said, and she hurried to the exit, leaving her phone number on the table. She said she was going back to the village now, and when she gives birth, she'll definitely let them know. Melody stood up, escorted her to the door, then returned to the kitchen. There was an open bottle of brandy on the table. Cameron sat at the table, his head lowered. "Are you celebrating impending fatherhood?" Melody asked with trembling voice. "Cameron, do you realize what you've done?" He raised his head, looked at her with bleary eyes, and smirked. "I don't understand why you believe that fool. You didn't even pay any attention to me. All your attention was on her." "But you had something with her." "I did," Cameron slurred, "but I love you." "You betrayed me." "Melody, don't exaggerate everything. What happened?" "Nothing. I was there alone. Youth memories resurfaced, that's all. It's not cheating, just a call of nature." "A call of nature. Cameron, I'll stay at my father's place. It's hard for me to be in the same apartment with you right now." Melody headed to the door, mechanically grabbing the piece of paper with Constance's phone number that she left behind. "She said she'd let us know, but we didn't give her our numbers. Or does she know yours?" "She does." Cameron shrugged and poured himself another drink. "And why did she come here? Couldn't she just call me?" "She wanted to surprise you," Melody exclaimed, "and me too." Tears welled up in her eyes, and she rushed out of the kitchen, hastily grabbing some belongings, and stormed out of the apartment without saying goodbye to her husband. She couldn't stand seeing him anymore. He behaved as if he was the one offended. Seeing his daughter on the doorstep of his apartment, Roel frowned. "Did he upset you?" "If only he did," Melody sobbed and threw herself into her father's arms. Usually reserved in her emotions, Melody was now overcome with hysteria. She told her father about her husband's infidelity, about his pregnant lover. Roel listened, growing darker with each word. Mabel stood nearby, seeing and shaking her head. "Divorce that scoundrel," her father finally said. "Dad, but I love him," Melody said through tears. "And we were doing so well before this." "You were doing well? Yet he was cheating on you. And who knows how many Constances he had." Then Mabel chimed in. "Roel, wait. Life has its ups and downs. We all need to calm down, including us. Yes, Cameron messed up, but, after all, aren't all men like that?" "I've never cheated on you in my life," Roel blushed with indignation. "I believe you. But remember how we started living together. You buried your wife, and not even a year passed before you brought me into the house. Do you think it was easy for Melody? And the neighbors, they were gossiping." "Mabel, that's different." "Yes, it's different, but my point is that you can't generalize everything. Even if Cameron did cheat and this child is his, it doesn't mean Melody has to ruin her family life." Roel just waved his hand and went into the living room, and Mabel made tea for Melody in the kitchen, then escorted her to her room. Melody collapsed on the bed and fell into a deep sleep. In the morning, she realized where she needed to go, to her mother's grave. There, her thoughts would calm down, and there she would find the right decision. Melody called in sick to work, deciding to spend the day alone, in silence. The young woman sat by her mother's grave, mentally speaking out everything that had accumulated in her soul. She believed that her mother could hear her. The weather was clear and sunny, the end of August, with a gentle breeze softly tousling her hair, as if soothing her. Looking at her mother's gravestone so dear and beautiful, Melody whispered, "Mom, how do I forgive him? And should I?" If her mother had said something or given a sign, Melody sincerely believed that it was possible, but nothing happened. Melody remembered her childhood, youth, and marrying Cameron. It might have been modest, but the feelings were real. Or were they? Melody couldn't find an answer. She stood up, sighed, and walked away. And then, at the cemetery gates, she ran into a middle-aged woman and a 10-year-old boy. "Let's go, son, let's put flowers on Grandma's grave," the woman said. Hearing this, Melody froze. She looked at the two of them and realized what she needed to do next. The most important thing for a woman is her child. And right now, she shouldn't be thinking about pregnant Constance. After all, Constance was an adult and responsible for her own actions. Let her have this child, but Melody needed to think about herself. It was high time to see a doctor and figure out why the long-awaited pregnancy wasn't happening. Melody was sure that the doctors would find out, prescribe the right treatment, and she would have her own child. And then, nothing would be able to destroy her family. As for the child from Cameron's affair, let it be born healthy. She would accept this girl as Cameron's daughter. She would even send gifts. What else could she do? The child was innocent in all of this. But now, the main thing was to take care of her health. Yes, she definitely needed her own baby. In her father's apartment, Cameron opened the door for Melody. He held flowers in his hands. They stood there, silently looking at each other. And then, Cameron fell to his knees. "Melody, darling, forgive me," her husband pleaded. "I can't live without you. I swear to you that connection with Constance was some kind of confusion. I'm ashamed. Yes, I can't change anything, but I don't want to lose you." "Cameron, get up. You don't have to," Melody said quietly. "What do we do now? It is what it is. Let's just keep living." "Do you forgive me?" "I forgive you." Cameron sprang up, extended the flowers, embraced her, and Melody, leaning on his shoulder, thought, "Everything will work out for us. We love each other." "Cameron, I've been thinking that it's time for us to go to the hospital, at least for me." She raised her head and looked questioningly at her husband. "Are you really sick? The girls from the accounting department told me you were sick." "No, I just said that. It's about something else. I think it's time for us to have a baby." "My darling, of course," Cameron smiled. "That's all I dream about. And as for this child of Constance's, don't worry, I don't need him." "Don't say that," she frowned. "The child is not to blame. We will help this little girl, and when our child is born, they can interact." "You are so wise," Cameron exclaimed with admiration and hugged Melody again. "How lucky I am to have you as my wife." While they made up, Roll and Mabel patiently sat in the kitchen. Then they invited the lovebirds to have tea. And once again, there was complete understanding, peace, and happiness between them. A few days later, Melody managed to see a doctor. Endless examinations began, and soon, the attending doctor gave Melody an unfavorable diagnosis. Her chances of becoming a mother were almost non-existent. The young woman couldn't believe it. How? Why? For what? There were many questions and almost no answers. Melody told Cameron about the doctor's verdict. "So we'll live for each other," he comforted her. "It's easy for you to say. You will soon have a child and I'm empty, you know, empty," Melody cried. "Don't say that. And why did you bring up Constance again?" Cameron frowned. "My dear, no one but you matters to me." Melody nestled against her husband's shoulder, and he stroked her head. And after some time, Constance called them and reported that she had given birth to a daughter. She named her Abby. It was unpleasant and painful for Melody to hear this, especially now when she couldn't have children herself, but she didn't show it. She even bought various baby items and sent a package to the village. And she also convinced Cameron to send Constance some money. "Why?" Cameron protested. "Not for her, but for the child," Melody replied. After a moment of silence, she added, "Maybe you should go there yourself." Of course, it was unpleasant for her to suggest this, but her feelings were not her priority now. However, Cameron just smirked. "Let her take care of the child herself, and be grateful that I'm helping at least this way," he said. These words stung Melody unpleasantly. She should be happy that her husband stays by her side, but Cameron's attitude towards his own child was too dismissive. 3 years had passed. During this time, Cameron had never once visited his hometown. Melody hinted several times that maybe he should go and visit his mother. "Well, I'll go with you," she would say. But Cameron sharply replied that they had no business there. Occasionally, Cameron's mother would call him. Mrs. Hanson mostly spoke to her son. Melody only passed on greetings. For some reason, Cameron was against their communication. At first, Melody found it surprising, but then she stopped paying attention. One evening, Mrs. Hanson called Cameron. He had just settled down to rest after dinner when the phone rang. "Yes, Mom, I'm listening," he said, surprised. "Why are you calling so late?" Mrs. Hanson said something to her son, and his eyebrows climbed higher and higher. "Can't you just spend some time with her?" he said sharply into the phone. She's your granddaughter, after all. I have work, you understand? Can't you pull yourself together for a week? He pressed the disconnect button irritably and looked at Melody, who was sitting nearby, looking at him questioningly. Can you imagine? My mother calls and says that Constance is going to have another baby. Well, that certainly can't be your child. Melody tensed slightly. You haven't been there once in all this time, as far as I know. I haven't, of course, but that's not the point. Constance got married, she has a legal husband, and my mother has recognized the granddaughter and wants to take care of her. And now Constance is going to the maternity hospital, asking my mother to look after Abby, but she's hardly able to. Why? She has health problems, Cameron hesitated. You didn't tell me. Why do you need to know all this? So my mother suggested to Constance to send the girl to us for a while, and Constance agreed. She agreed? Melody was surprised. Don't we need to be asked about this? And I'm thinking the same. We're practically being told after the fact, like, come and pick up your daughter, she's yours. Wait, what about her husband? You said she got married. Why can't he look after the child? Damn if I know. They all seem to be the same. What do you mean? Drinkers. You never told me about this. Melody raised her eyebrows. Yeah, my mother has been drinking all her life, and Constance, from what I understand, has started too. And she found herself a husband just like her. Cameron replied gloomily. Good Lord, why did you stay silent? Melody exclaimed. Do you realize in what conditions the child lives there? Of course, we need to go and take her with us. And to herself, she suddenly thought. Maybe for good. Cameron didn't immediately agree with his wife's argument, but Melody managed to convince him. And the next day, taking time off work, they set off for the village by car. The journey was long, about 10 hours. During all this time, Melody thought a lot. How she would meet Constance, Mrs. Hanson, and most importantly, how the girl would react to being taken away from her home. Of course, temporarily, but it was still stressful for the child. Melody thought more and more about Abby, and to her surprise, she realized she already wanted to hold this girl, to hug her. And even though she was a child from another woman, she was Cameron's daughter, so she wasn't a stranger to her. They arrived in the village at night. The car drove along the overgrown dirt road and stopped near the dilapidated house. A light was still on in the window. And your mother lives here? Melody exclaimed, looking at her husband reproachfully. Cameron, your mother lives in such poverty, and you never helped her. And I didn't think about what it's like for her here. Cameron, we'll have to fix the fence tomorrow. Look, it's completely fallen apart. It's not fallen apart. Looks like they used it for firewood, Cameron chuckled. How's that? Melody was surprised again. You'll see for yourself soon. Oh, Melody, you can't imagine what my childhood was like. And then Melody thought. Indeed, Cameron had never really talked about his childhood, only rare memories of school, of how he managed to get a scholarship to university and move to the city, how he worked and studied at the same time. Melody thought Cameron just wanted to be independent, and that made him a bit callous towards his family. But it turned out that life had made him that way. They got out of the car. Melody looked around warily. Darkness. An owl hooted somewhere. A dog howled on the next street. Do people even live in this village? She asked. They live or survive. Everyone's different, her husband shrugged. Let's go. He stepped onto the path to the house and Melody followed him. The old wooden door creaked and a foul smell hit her nose. What a homeless shelter smell, Melody blurted out. And this is how my mother lives, Cameron said sadly. He knocked on the door out of politeness and then opened it immediately. Before Melody's eyes, an unpleasant scene unfolded. The kitchen they entered was so dirty, there are no words. A pile of unwashed dishes on the table, a filthy floor, a heap of empty bottles against the wall. The whole house lit up. Mom, where are you? Cameron called out. Somewhere deep in the house there was some mumbling, then grumbling, and soon an unkempt woman of indeterminate age appeared in the doorway. This was Mrs. Hanson, Cameron's mother. My dear boy's come, the woman said with a drunken smile. Oh, I wasn't expecting this. Why not? I told you I'd come and not alone with my wife. This is Melody, my wife, Cameron said apologetically, looking at his wife. That's my mother for you. Yes, that's me, Mrs. Hanson stupidly smiled. And you're Melody, right? Oh, darling, we finally meet. Breathing alcohol fumes on Melody, Mrs. Hanson went to hug and kiss her. Melody involuntarily grimaced. Mother, stop it, Cameron snapped at her. Why are you drunk again? Me? Just a little bit, the woman mumbled. Just got my pension yesterday. And drank it all? You knew your son was coming. Couldn't you tidy up a bit? Why are you ashamed, Mother? Let your wife tidy up. At least she'll help a sick old lady a bit. A sick old lady? Are you talking about yourself? Okay, that's enough. Where does Constance live? Is it there?
Yeah.
Where else would she be? Next door, but you shouldn't go there now. Durward, her man, is there. Yeah, I know, you told me yourself, and you also said I should come and get the child. I did? Mrs. Hanson stared at her son, trying to remember. Oh, right. Constance is about to go to the maternity hospital soon. Who will look after her child? I'm sick all over. And you? You're the father, Melody. Forgive me, but my son is the father. Mrs. Hanson giggled foolishly. Melody couldn't bear to stay in that house any longer, so she said she would sleep in the car. Mrs. Hanson kept yelling something, seeming offended that her daughter-in-law spoke to her so dryly, but Melody didn't want to hear anything else. She lay down in the car's back seat and remembered her mom. The image of her mom was a bit blurry, as if in a fog, but Melody still knew she was sweet, kind, and beautiful. She remembered how on weekends she would bake pancakes, how she would braid her hair before school, how she would kiss her on the forehead, and she always smelled nice like cinnamon or vanilla. Mom worked in a pastry shop. They lived well with Dad, and then suddenly this illness came. Mom was gone in 3 months. Melody's heart squeezed with bitter memories. Why did everything turn out like this? And then she immediately thought of the woman she had just seen. It's hard to even call her a woman, and she's Cameron's mother. He's a good man, my husband, Melody thought. He didn't break, didn't give in, escape from this horror, became a decent person. Then she remembered why she had come here in the first place. How does a little girl live here, her husband's daughter? So she sees her grandmother like this? What a disgrace. I hope Constance has enough sense not to leave the child alone with this woman, Melody thought fleetingly. She saw Cameron coming out of the house and heading towards the car. Yeah, my mom has really gone off the deep end, he said, getting into the driver's seat. Last time we could at least sleep in the house, but now it's impossible. We'll spend the night in the car, and in the morning, we'll go to Constance's and pick up the girl. Cameron, has your mom been drinking for a long time? Melody asked quietly. For a long time. Cameron sighed heavily. He explained that he was 7 years old when his father went to work in the north and found another woman there. Mom drank out of grief, and she's been doing it her whole life. When Cameron was in school, he was even taken to an orphanage a few times, but he ran away because he was mistreated there. Cameron set a goal for himself, even in school, to leave for the city. He worked hard for it. He did well on his final exams, managed to get into university, studied, found a good job, and moved up. Then he met Melody. Why didn't you ever tell me any of this? Melody asked sympathetically. I was always ashamed of my mother, and I still am. I knew how reverently you treat the memory of your mom. And what about me? Yeah, it's shameful. Well, maybe she can be cured? They've tried to treat her many times. When I was still in school, she was taken for treatment several times. Every time she would relapse and drink even more. That's how she lives. Sad. Poor thing, and I knew nothing, Melody whispered, stroking her husband's head. It's okay, everything's fine. Let her live as she wants, and I'm lucky I met you. He kissed her hand. They talked a little more and fell asleep. The dawn broke, and Melody opened her eyes. Cameron was asleep, leaning back slightly in the driver's seat. Well, what a night it had been. Every joint seemed to ache from the uncomfortable position of her body. Melody stretched and yawned. Cameron stirred, yawning loudly, and turned to Melody. How did you sleep? He asked with a smile. Don't even ask, Melody chuckled. Very uncomfortable. That's for sure, so shall we go get the girl? Yes, let's go get your daughter, and are you not going to visit your mom? Why bother? You saw it all yourself yesterday, and please, Melody, don't call that girl my daughter. It doesn't sit well with me. Cameron, she is your daughter, and one more thing, why didn't we think about this before? We'll have to go somewhere, to the social services or administration. We'll need to get a document stating that Constance is giving us temporary custody of her daughter. Otherwise, how do we explain why the child is with us, and what if she needs to go to the hospital? Are you already deciding that she'll live with us? Cameron smirked. At most, she'll stay a week. And another thing, we both work. You'll probably have to take a week off. Yeah, I think so too, Melody agreed. But we still need to get some paperwork stating that the child will be with us. We'll figure it out, Cameron nodded. He started the car and they drove down another street. Melody looked out the window at the waking village and couldn't help but marvel at the poverty and desolation here. Abandoned and run-down houses, everything overgrown. Yet it seemed like there used to be a good village here, people lived here. Then everyone dispersed, leaving only those who had nowhere else to go, or no desire to change anything in their lives. And now, a little girl lives here. Is there at least a daycare or school here? She asked her husband in bewilderment. What are you talking about? Cameron shook his head. They closed everything a long time ago. I finished school in the neighboring village. We were bused to school. And daycare? There was never one here. The only thing left from civilization here is the store. He nodded towards the leaning structure, with a padlock hanging on the door. That's the store. Horrible. And how can people live here? And what about medical help? What if someone gets sick? Medical help? They closed that too, it seems. The old nurse died and no new specialist would come to such a remote place. Ambulance service is available for emergencies, or you have to go to the hospital yourself, by bus or car. And how do people survive here? They don't live, they exist, Cameron grimly replied. It's their own fault. Take, for example, my mother. If she didn't drink, she would have moved away long ago. She was offered a house in the neighboring village for free a few years ago. Just needed some repairs, but she didn't want to. And you knew and didn't help? Cameron, I'm amazed. You didn't tell me anything. Yeah, I didn't tell you because there was no need for you to know all this. And I didn't help her for one reason. She would have turned everything into a mess even in a new place. So they arrived at the needed house. It wasn't exemplary either, old and shabby. But at least the fence was intact, and there was even a flower bed in the yard. Despite the early hour, there was noise coming from the house, shouts, and the sound of children crying. Melody and Cameron exchanged glances and got out of the car. They hadn't even opened the gate when the doors of the house burst open with noise, and out came a disheveled Constance. She was wearing only a nightshirt, her long hair disheveled. "People, look what's happening," she yelled. "My husband wants to kill me." Cameron froze in place, holding Melody's hand, like there's no need to go there, let them sort it out themselves. Following Constance, a skinny man appeared at the doorway and stretched out pants. "Who touched you, idiot? I just asked why there's no food," he shouted. "Go inside and sleep first." "Am I drunk? Is that what you're saying? You're just the same. And when would I have cooked? When we were celebrating your birthday until late at night," Constance retorted. "So what did we celebrate with? Is there really no food left from the celebration?" Melody suddenly interjected. Constance, upon hearing a foreign voice, froze for a moment, then turned and stared at the guests. "Wow, who came? Oh, it's Cameron with his girlfriend." What, Cameron finally decided to take a look at his daughter? She sneered. "Constance, we've come to take her until you give birth to the second one," Melody replied. "We were told you wouldn't mind." "Not mind," said the drunken man. "Why bother? Take this child, maybe forever." "What are you deciding for me? I'm the mother, and I have the final say," Constance said. "If I want to give her away or not, there's nothing you can do." "What, Cameron? Remembered about the child? Probably your city girlfriend can't give you a child. City folks are like that, and I, soon, will become a mother again. But this won't be your child anymore," she added, swaying, and stroked her stomach. Melody watched in horror at the enraged, drunken woman who was pregnant. How could she behave like this, drinking on top of everything? Dreadful. Cameron was bewildered. He wanted to turn back, but Melody suddenly grabbed his sleeve and pointed to the house. There, on the porch, a little girl appeared dressed in rags. The child stood there, fear in her eyes, tears streaming down her cheeks. Constance's husband turned to her and yelled, "Why did you come out? Go back to sleep," he shouted, then made a threatening gesture toward the girl. The little girl recoiled. Melody flinched at the sight of it all. She lunged forward. Within seconds, she was on the porch, scooping up the frightened girl into her arms and holding her close. "Don't you dare lay a hand on this child," Melody practically roared. In that moment, she felt like a protective tigress, defending not her own, but nonetheless, a helpless cub. Constance was taken aback by such a brazen guest, staring at Melody, then at Cameron. "Durward, why are these people making decisions in my yard?" Constance said. He snapped to attention and approached Melody. "Indeed, madam, what is the meaning of this? Why are you taking someone else's child?" At this, Cameron stepped forward, blocking his wife and glaring angrily at Constance. "I never thought, Constance, that this is how you live. It's disgusting. What did you do with the money I sent for the child? Drink it away with your boyfriend." "I'm not a boyfriend, I'm her husband," said that same Durward. "Damn with you, husband. Quickly, get the documents for the girl." "So you really are taking her?" gasped Constance. "And for good?" "Don't hold your breath. Once you have your second child and come to your senses a bit, then I'll hand her over," grumbled Cameron, nodding toward Melody in the car. Melody, holding the girl tightly, immediately fled from the yard. She wanted to leave all this horror behind as soon as possible. She got into the car, Abby sitting beside her. "Is the little girl scared?" the woman asked gently. The girl didn't answer, only pressed herself against Melody again. For the first time in her life, Melody felt something extraordinary. She heard the beating of the little heart, smoothed the tangled hair, wiped away the tears. She wanted to cover this child with a protective shield from all the troubles, shield her from all the sorrows. Perhaps this was maternal instinct. Cameron finished his conversation with Constance about something, then also got into the car. "All right, I have the girl's documents. Let's go," he said. "Melody, you're right. We need to go to the authorities. What will they say to us?" "Essentially, the girl is nobody to me." "Abby," Melody said quietly. "What?" Cameron turned to them in surprise. "The girl's name is Abby." "Oh, right, I just can't get used to it yet." "That's understandable. Cameron, will you visit your mother? At least give her a little money, so she can drink it away. You see what everyone does here, they just drink, even pregnant women. It's awful. I didn't think Constance would stoop this low." "Let's still go see your mother," Melody insisted, quietly but firmly. "She's still your mother. You don't even realize how lucky you are. At least she's alive for you. However she may be, she's still alive." Melody remembered her own mother, wiped away a tear, and embraced Abby. The girl had already started to settle in a bit, looking at the sad, beautiful lady beside her with incomprehension. Cameron just smirked and shrugged. "Mother, haven't seen her for so many years and still wouldn't mind not seeing her for as many more." All right, he'd do as Melody asked, but she wouldn't get any money from him anyway. Surprisingly, Mrs. Hanson was sober and even tried to tidy up the house. She was just sweeping the floor when Melody, Cameron, and the girl entered her home. Yesterday's mountain of bottles had disappeared somewhere. Seeing the guests, the woman threw up her hands. "Oh, my son, Melody, come in. And who's this with you, my beloved granddaughter?" Abby boldly approached Mrs. Hanson, who hugged and kissed her. "My dear, sweet girl," Mrs. Hanson said, stroking Abby's tousled head. "You must be hungry. I'll make something for you." "No need, Mom," Cameron interjected sharply, wrinkling his nose in disgust. "We're leaving already. Just stopped by for a minute." "How come, son? We haven't seen each other in 3 years or more. Sit down at least. Tell me how you've been. Melody, let me have a look at you. What a wonderful wife you have." Mrs. Hanson smiled at Melody, who smiled back. On one hand, she shared her husband's mood, but it was still uncomfortable. After all, it was his mother. "No, we'll go, and when Constance gives birth, we'll bring the girl back," Cameron decided, turning towards the door and adding as he left, "Mom, don't drink. You're not young anymore." Understood, son," she followed after him, her expression changing, almost tearing up. Melody felt sorry for this unhappy woman. She touched her hand and whispered, "Don't worry, everything will work out. Just don't drink." and she slipped some money into Mrs. Hanson's robe pocket. The woman looked at Melody in surprise, then gratefully nodded. As they walked to the car, Mrs. Hanson held Abby's hand, who trustingly walked beside her grandmother. "You would do well to let Abby stay with you completely," Mrs. Hanson whispered to Melody on the way. "She's not needed by Constance, and you see for yourself, I'm not a good nanny. Abby often stays with me, comes hungry. Even though I drink, I'll always find something to feed the child. But Constance, she drinks away the money Cameron sends with her man, doesn't spend anything on Abby. Keep my granddaughter. I understand she's a stranger to you, but she's family to Cameron. Don't be angry with him." "I'm not angry anymore," Melody replied. Cameron had already sat in the car, impatiently glancing towards his wife and mother. Mrs. Hanson cast a brief glance at her son and whispered again, "Anyway, dear, keep an eye on my son. He'll deceive you and be ashamed, denying his own father. He only seeks profit from women." "You're wrong," Melody shot back angrily at her mother-in-law. "Cameron is not like that." "I hope I'm wrong," Mrs. Hanson sighed, then added louder, "Don't mistreat Abby. Let her stay with you." Melody, overcoming her disgust, still embraced the woman, which pleased her, and she also hugged her daughter-in-law tightly, then kissed Abby. "Be smart, my dear, and may luck be on your side more than on mine," Mrs. Hanson whispered and started crying.
"Grandma, are you crying?" Abby sniffled. "No, darling, it's just allergies," Mrs. Hanson smiled, looked at Melody and added softly, "Take her away, and don't bring her back here anymore."
Melody backed away, pulling the girl along with her. Later in the car, as they drove away, Cameron asked her what she and his mother had been whispering about. "Oh, just stuff," she shrugged. "Your mom isn't that bad after all. Just a miserable woman broken by her husband's betrayal." "Betrayal?" Cameron chuckled. "Then half the country should be drinking. So many husbands leave their wives." "But you're not going to leave me, right?" Melody asked thoughtfully. "Where did you get that idea?" Cameron laughed. "Everything's fine between us, right?" "I just can't give you a child," Melody said. "These kids are nothing but trouble," Cameron said abruptly. "We need to sort things out with this girl right now." "Abby. Her name is Abby," Melody reminded, hugging the little girl. "Yeah, Abby, we should have just called child services right away and be done with it." "But Cameron, you don't mean to say you want to send her to an orphanage? You were just asked to watch over her," Melody protested. "But did you see the conditions the kid's living in?" "But you're her father. Cameron, let her stay with us for a while, then we'll decide what to do." "But we need to go to child services, like you said, otherwise we might get accused of kidnapping." "We'll go now, try to explain everything, negotiate." Cameron just nodded in response. Honestly, he just wanted to drop the kid off at an orphanage and be done with it. Why did he get involved in this mess? Well, Melody was looking at him like that. He decided to play the noble husband and father. Fine, he could hold out for a few weeks, maybe a month at most. They quickly found the department they needed in the administration building and explained everything. The pleasant young woman listened and sighed heavily. "Constance has been under close observation for a year now. We're not intervening because we believe the child is better off with her biological mother. So, you're the father? It's not good that there's no record of you in the child's documents. Let's do this. I'll arrange the necessary paperwork stating that the child will live with you for a month. The child services in your city will get in touch with you, and you'll be under supervision. Don't worry, it's just procedure. Of course, it's not entirely right, but we'd rather not send the child to an orphanage. Are you okay with that?" Melody nodded in agreement. Cameron did too. "Well, that's settled then." The child services worker smiled. "Let the girl stay with you for a month. Maybe Constance will come to her senses. And if not, then you can look after the girl. She's not a stranger after all." "Not a stranger," Melody replied for her husband. "You can be sure Abby will be fine with us." The employee nodded in response. Afterwards, she issued them a certificate stating that Abby would be living with her father, and they left. But in the car, Cameron was indignant. "This clerk is so silly. Essentially, she just handed the child over to strangers. What if we tricked her?" No, she won't last long there, he grumbled. Cameron, I don't understand you. Melody shook her head. The girl did a good deed, or were you hoping for a different outcome? Cameron just waved his hand and stared at the road. They drove almost the entire remaining way in silence. They returned home by nightfall. Melody carried sleepy Abby in her arms into the apartment and put her to sleep on the couch in the living room. You know, she looks so much like you, Melody remarked with a smile, entering the kitchen where Cameron was sullenly drinking tea. Yeah, I didn't notice, he replied. Melody, don't get attached to this girl. She's only temporarily staying with us. What do you plan to do with her tomorrow? Me? Melody was surprised. Are there options? She's still little. You can't leave her alone in the apartment. I'll go to work in the morning and take leave, and then we'll figure out what to do. Then? Melody, there won't be a then, Cameron sharply replied. Fine. I'm going to bed. Melody looked after her husband in confusion. Why was he reacting like this to his own daughter? After all, he went to pick her up, and now suddenly he's dissatisfied with something. Melody decided that Cameron was just bewildered. He would get used to the girl, and then Melody thought that maybe they could manage to keep Abby with them. If they couldn't have their own children, at least she could be a mother this way since Constance doesn't need Abby. Melody convinced herself of that. In the morning, Melody woke up and Cameron was already gone. He left for work earlier than usual, not even waking her up. Her husband's behavior was completely incomprehensible. Who was he upset with? He should be upset with himself first and foremost. Melody peeked into the living room. Abby was asleep, curled up on the couch. Melody couldn't help but smile. My, she's so small and cute. Melody snapped out of it. She had to go to work too. She had hoped that Cameron would spend some time with the child in the morning while she went to ask her boss for leave. But her husband had already left. I'll have to wake Abby up and take her with me, Melody decided. She went to the kitchen, prepared breakfast, and went to wake the girl up. Sweetheart, wake up, Melody said gently, stroking Abby's head. The little girl suddenly startled and opened her eyes in fear. Then she quickly sat up on the couch, tucked her legs under herself, and continued to stare at Melody without blinking. Sweetheart, what's wrong? The woman said with surprise. I'm Melody. Did you forget? We came to our place yesterday, and for now, you'll be living with me and... Daddy. Daddy? Abby repeated. But where's Mommy? We'll take you to Mommy when your little brother or sister is born. No, please don't, the girl cried. Don't take me to her. She's mean. She yells and hits like this. Abby waved her hand several times in the air. Melody's heart sank at the sight of it. She hugged the girl and kissed her on the forehead. Don't cry, darling. I'll try to think of something, the woman whispered softly. But she wondered what could she do. Constance hadn't lost her parental rights. Cameron, Abby's biological father, almost avoided his daughter, and she, Melody, who was she to this girl? Nobody. And the girl was so good, so smart. She was only 3 years old, and yet she spoke so clearly, and hardly anyone had likely worked with her deliberately. But if Abby were returned to Constance, she would mistreat her, scare her. What to do? Melody decided she would think about it a little later. For now, she needed to get ready for work. Abby, have you ever been on the subway? Melody smiled. What's that? The little one asked, surprised. It's a train underground. The girl thought for a moment, furrowing her brow. Melody realized that Abby had probably never seen a train in her little life, let alone one underground. Okay, you'll see for yourself soon, but for now, let's go wash up in the bathroom and then we'll have breakfast. In the bathroom, Melody gave Abby a fluffy towel, a children's toothbrush shaped like a rabbit, strawberry-flavored toothpaste, and soap in the shape of a dolphin. At first, the girl took all this with caution, but then she enthusiastically brushed her teeth, washed her face, wiped her happy face with a towel, and Melody couldn't help but admire her. In the kitchen, Melody placed a plate of pancakes in front of Abby. The girl enjoyed her meal, remembering to thank Melody at the end. These things are delicious, she said. These things are called pancakes, Melody smiled. All right, sweetheart, let's get ready. We're going to take the subway to my work. But what to dress the girl in? Melody looked through the clothes that Constance had packed for Abby and realized that there was nothing decent. Everything was old and worn out. Melody shook her head. What Constance did spend Cameron's money on? It turned out, on alcohol. In the end, she chose relatively normal jeans, a sweater, and dressed the girl, braiding her hair. It had been so long since she had done this. Melody combed the girl's hair, remembering how her mother used to do the same in her childhood. It seemed like she still felt the touch of her mother's hands. Then, when her mother was gone, she tried to braid her own hair. It didn't go well at first, but she got the hang of it eventually. And when Mabel appeared in the house, she occasionally braided Melody's hair too. But the girl didn't feel any special love during those times. It seemed like her stepmother was pulling her hair on purpose. Or was it just an illusion? Overall, Mabel wasn't that bad. Melody sighed. With the final manipulations, the braid was ready. She admired it. And it turned out quite well. Little Abby, content, twirled in front of the mirror. Soon they were riding the subway. The little girl, clinging to Melody, looked around with interest. She was a little afraid of everything new and unknown, so she pressed closer to Melody. And Melody, feeling the warmth of the girl next to her, the beating of her heart, felt that something new, something unknown, was born in her soul. Entering the office with the girl, Melody went straight to the boss. Julia, a colleague from the office, raised her eyebrows when she saw her. "Hey dear, are you skipping work today?" she greeted. "Hey, yeah, something like that. I'm going to the boss." "Why?" "I want to take a leave." "Melody, the quarterly report is due soon." "I'll manage before the quarterly report." "Really? Well, okay. And who do we have here?" Julia leaned over to the little girl and patted her head, then straightened up and asked Melody in a lowered voice, "Is this Cameron's daughter?" Melody silently nodded and continued walking under her colleague's scrutinizing gaze. Now she knew that as soon as she left the boss's office, the whole office would know that Melody had brought her husband's lover's daughter to the office. But she was to blame herself once she confided in Julia, told her about Constance and about the girl and about their intention to take the girl in for a while. She hadn't expected Julia to be such a gossip, but she spread everything Melody told her all over the office. The secretary in the reception area also looked surprised at the newcomers. "Melody, who is this child? You know that children shouldn't be here," the secretary said. "I know," Melody said softly. "But there was no one to leave the girl with. I urgently need to talk to Mr. Crooks about this." "I don't know if he'll see you," the secretary said skeptically. "He needs to be at the hospital in an hour. He'll be leaving soon." "The boss is sick?" Melody worried. "I don't know," the secretary replied. "Well, I'll try asking. Maybe he'll find a minute for you." Melody knocked on the boss's door and peered in. Mr. Crooks, seeing her at the door, invited her in. Melody entered with Abby, who shyly clung to the woman's leg. Mr. Crooks was seated behind the desk. Melody noted that the boss looked somewhat sickly. She hadn't seen him in probably a week, and now it seemed like he had lost some weight. "Melody, hello. Do you have something urgent?" the boss asked. "Mr. Crooks, yes, I need to take a leave. I'm sorry, it's urgent. I have, you see, a child." "A child?" Mr. Crooks said, surprised. "Oh yes, I heard about your situation." "Julia did her best," Melody said with a sad smile. The boss didn't respond. He pensively twirled a ballpoint pen in his hands. Melody waited anxiously. "Yes, all right, go and get everything sorted, and I'll sign your application. But you do remember that the quarterly report is due soon?" "Yes, I think everything will work out. She has a father. He'll look after the girl later." "So you and Cameron are keeping the child in the family permanently?" Melody just shrugged. Of course, she wanted to say yes, but everything was so unclear. From the boss's office, Melody went to the accounting department with the girl, where she processed all the documents. The chief accountant, of course, pursed her lips, but agreed to let her subordinate go, since the boss had allowed it. "What's up with Mr. Crooks?" Julia whispered to Melody. "They say he's seriously ill. His secretary let it slip. We might have a change in leadership soon." "What are you talking about?" Melody gasped. "And who?" "His wife. Will suffer even more with her in charge." Melody didn't reply. She had only seen Mr. Crooks's wife a couple of times. She remembered she was a large, unpleasant woman, seemingly older than the boss. God forbid if she took control of the company. Although it was to be expected, after all, the business essentially belonged to her. She inherited it from her father, and her husband simply managed everything. The boss was wonderful. Melody liked that he was always fair, never raised his voice, and was very kind. Hopefully, Mr. Crooks's condition wasn't serious. Melody said goodbye to everyone in the accounting department and, picking up Abby, went to her husband's office. The girl sat happily in her arms, as the ladies in the accounting office had given her chocolate and an apple. They even gave her a notepad. They peeked into Cameron's office. He was studying some document. "Melody?" Cameron was surprised to see his wife. "Why did you bring the girl here?" "And who else would I leave her with? She's still little. I've submitted a leave request. We're going shopping with Abby," Melody explained. "Why?" "We need to buy Abby some things." "Melody, why spend money?" Cameron wrinkled his nose disapprovingly. "I'm already helping her mother." "But you should have seen the stuff she sent with the girl. We need to dress her up. She's such a beauty." Melody smiled at Abby and kissed her soft cheek. The girl shyly smiled back and looked cautiously at Cameron. She was a little afraid of him, still getting to know him. Cameron furrowed his brow again, saying he had a lot of work. "All right," Melody smiled and looked at the little girl. "Shall we go, Abby, and not bother Dad?" "Not bother Dad," Abby repeated. Melody picked up the girl again and left the office. Cameron didn't even bid them farewell. He was completely absorbed in his work. In the children's clothing store, Melody bought many beautiful outfits for Abby, dresses, sweaters, and pants. They also bought lots of hair clips, rubber bands, and bows. Additionally, Melody picked out a doll, slightly smaller than Abby herself. She noticed how the girl looked at it but didn't dare ask. In general, Melody noticed that Abby didn't ask for anything. She was very shy, apparently. She wasn't used to the idea of being bought things at all, and only when they were leaving the store did the little girl whisper, "Miss Melody, is all this for me?" "For you, darling, for you," Melody laughed. She felt so good she didn't even realize how enjoyable it was to buy children's things and how nice it was to give them. When Abby heard the answer, she smiled happily. Yes, she liked this beautiful lady more and more, who was nothing like her mom, who was always yelling. Returning home from the store, they met Roll and Mabel by the entrance. They already knew that their daughter and son-in-law had gone to pick up the child, so they decided to come themselves to see who they had brought. Roll didn't like the idea of his daughter temporarily caring for someone else's child, but did anyone listen to him? However, Mabel was very eager to meet the little girl. She already called her granddaughter. "Is she really your granddaughter?" Roll frowned. "She's a complete stranger to us." But Mabel just waved it off. "What's the child's fault?" And when they saw the girl at the house, both Roll and Mabel involuntarily smiled. Abby was like an angel. "Hello, granddaughter," Roll said first and handed the girl a plush bunny. "Caught it on the way?" Abby blinked her eyes, hugged her toy tightly, and shyly smiled in response. Mabel just smirked. Why was Roll upset? The first one had acknowledged the girl. And then, at home, Roll enthusiastically played with Abby. They played hide-and-seek and built a pyramid out of books. Mabel happily joined in. Meanwhile, Melody prepared dinner, occasionally peeking into the room and smiling. They played as if they had known each other for a long time. Yes, Roll probably just dreams of becoming a grandfather, but his daughter couldn't make him happy. And here it turned out like this. After dinner, Abby started to get fussy, and Melody put her to bed. Roll and Mabel were getting ready to leave. "Daughter, bring her to us more often," Roll said at the doorstep. "She's a wonderful girl." And in the evening, Cameron returned from work. Even though Melody had tidied up the scattered toys, the house still wasn't as tidy as it used to be. Cameron didn't like it right away. "What's this mess?" He started criticizing Melody almost as soon as he entered. "What's all this stuff lying around?" "Oh, it's a pyramid," Melody smiled. We didn't notice it with Abby. We didn't notice, Cameron grumbled. You've made a mess in the apartment. Did you even prepare dinner? Of course, dear, we're having cutlets and mashed potatoes today. Like in a canteen, you probably bought frozen cutlets, her husband grumbled again. You could have made schnitzel or fried chicken. Sorry, I didn't have time. Remember, it's just our first day together with Abby, and my parents visited and the day flew by so fast. And the cutlets, well, they were frozen, but they're tasty. Abby and I already tried them. So, you ate without waiting for the host? Cameron, I don't understand why you're angry. Melody's patience was wearing thin too. And why was he blaming her for everything? She looks after the child, and all she gets is complaints. Cameron didn't answer her. He went to the kitchen, made himself a sandwich, and went to the room converted into his office. A minute later, a wild cry came from there. Melody! Melody, come see what this brat did! Abby, hearing the cry, flinched and huddled in the corner of the couch. She thought people couldn't shout so loudly here. Melody was just ironing clothes at that moment. Don't be afraid, sweetheart. She smiled at Abby affectionately and was about to leave the room to tell Cameron not to shout like that, as her husband burst into the living room. This is what she did, he shouted, waving some piece of paper in front of Melody's face. What is this? She calmly asked, stepping forward and shielding the girl with her body. It's a contract with suppliers. I left it at home. It's been lying peacefully on the table for several days. Today, I wanted to study it properly, and what did she do? He turned the contract over. There were beautiful gouache stains on it. By the way, they also bought gouache at the children's store today, and brushes. When did Abby manage to visit Cameron's office? Apparently, when Melody was in the kitchen preparing dinner. Why did you do this? Cameron's voice loomed menacingly over the girl. Don't shout at her, Melody intervened. You're to blame. You knew there was a child in the house and you scatter your documents everywhere. You stayed home with her and should have watched her. And I did watch her. And haven't you forgotten that Abby is your daughter and she's only 3 years old? Cameron, what's the big deal? You can print a new document and that's it. Are you going to tell me what to do in my own house? This apartment is as much yours as it is mine. If you've forgotten, let me remind you that it was my father who gave us money for the down payment on the mortgage. And now, I have to be indebted to him for the rest of my life? Who pays the mortgage every month? You or your dad? Cameron, I don't understand you. Why are you upset? He wanted to say something else but restrained himself, just snorted and went back into his office. Scared. Melody sat down on the couch and hugged Abby. Don't be afraid, little one. Everything will be fine. Daddy's just in a bad mood. That happens. And I'm sorry, I forgot to tell you. Don't go into his office and never take papers from his desk. If you need paper for drawing, ask me, okay? Okay. Abby nodded and threw herself into Melody's arms, then whispered almost into her ear, Miss Melody, can you be my mommy? Melody looked puzzled at the girl, didn't say anything, just hugged her tighter. A week passed. During this time, Cameron got more or less used to his daughter, no longer reacted so strongly to her presence, and even played with Abby sometimes in the evenings. You see what a lovely girl she is, Melody said when they, having put the girl to bed, sat in the kitchen and drank tea. Cameron, let's make a deal with Constance so that Abby can live with us. Let's formalize everything properly. It's time for Abby to go to kindergarten. And why do you want this headache? Cameron was surprised. There are so many problems with a child. You see it yourself now. Feeding, walking, sleeping, and this eternal mess. I agreed to take care of the child for a while, and that's it. Melody felt a sting in her heart from these words. She had already gotten used to the idea that Abby lived with them. And then, a terrible piece of news came from the village. Mrs. Hanson called, stumbling over her words either from grief or from alcoholic drinks, and said that Constance and her husband had died. He took her to the maternity hospital on a motorcycle, and the motorcycle was old and unreliable, and Constance's husband was clearly drunk. They went off the road and that was it. Cameron, hearing this, fell into thought. Where to put the girl now? Melody, however, perceived the whole situation differently now. Now Cameron would definitely agree to take Abby, and they would be a complete family. Of course, they still had to go to the guardianship authorities, gather a bunch of documents, but Melody was already prepared for that, and even started calling Abby her daughter in her mind. Another week passed. Melody took care of Abby and hinted to Cameron several times that it was time to go to the guardianship authorities to formalize everything for the girl officially. Cameron, the girl needs medical supervision, timely vaccinations, and it's time to enroll her in kindergarten, Melody said to her husband, not for the first time. So you've already decided everything for the both of us? He said grimly. I have a lot of work piled up right now. I'm swamped. I don't even have time to catch my breath. Yes, but it's time for me to go back to work too, Melody reminded him. Who will we leave Abby with? I regret 1,000 times over taking her in, Cameron answered with bitterness. All I hear is Abby, Abby. Do you even remember that she's not your child, actually? Cameron, why are you like this? Melody said reproachfully. Okay, sorry. It's just that work is really tough right now, so I lose my temper. And what else happened there? Mr. Crooks got sick. His wife is covering for him now. Cameron explained that Mrs. Crooks had set her own rules at the firm. She demands a lot, sometimes the impossible. Many employees are at their wits' end. Cameron manages to cope. He found common ground with the new boss. But some employees don't want to work under her leadership. Several people have already quit. Well, and what about the girls from the accounting department? They haven't called me, haven't said anything. Melody was surprised. You have such dramas there, and I don't know anything. The accounting department has gone quiet, Cameron chuckled. Yes, it's time for me to finish my vacation. I need to go help the girls, but what should we do about Abby? Maybe until we sort everything out, we should hire a nanny. A nanny? Am I a millionaire? No. What do you suggest then? Cameron didn't answer. He went back to his office, and Melody went to Abby. The girl was already asleep, hugging her plush rabbit, and then it dawned on Melody. Why not ask her father and Mabel to look after the little one, since they've all become very close? Melody decided that she would go to her father in the morning and offer to be Abby's nanny. She planned to take Abby with her, but in the morning the girl was being stubborn, didn't want to get up. It was Saturday. Cameron was also at home. Melody asked her husband to look after the girl, and she herself went to roll. She didn't want to discuss such matters over the phone. As Melody expected, her father Mabel liked the idea, especially Mabel. She enjoyed spending time with the little one. Actually, daughter, don't drag it out. Formalize the documents for the girl, her father advised. First, you probably need to do a DNA test between Cameron and Abby to prove the relationship. Yes, I think so too, Melody agreed. Thank you. They sat with their parents for a little while longer, chatting about this and that, and a couple of hours later, Melody went home. On the way, she stopped by the mall. A few days ago, she had spotted a cute dress for Abby, and today she decided to buy it. And she also stopped by the bakery and bought a keiki. After that, a satisfied woman went home with her purchases. I'm home, she shouted as she entered the hallway. Cameron, Abby, let's go to the kitchen for tea. To her surprise, she was met with silence. Melody walked through the rooms, even checked the bathroom. No one was there. Strange. Where did Cameron go with the daughter? He hadn't mentioned going anywhere with daughter. Yes, mentally, Melody increasingly referred to Abby like this. Maybe he went to work? Most likely. That workaholic, he can't even have a day off without his work, Melody speculated. Melody called her husband, but his phone was unavailable. She felt a slight sense of worry. To distract herself a little, she decided to tidy up the house while waiting for her husband and Abby. She started with the living room, which they had turned into something like a nursery. To her surprise, she didn't find some of Abby's things. There were no documents either, and also the plush rabbit that Roll had given, which had become the girl's favorite toy, was missing. Melody dialed her husband's number again, but his phone was still off. The woman decided to go to the office. There was hope that Cameron and Abby had gone there. But why did he take the girl's clothes and documents? Melody didn't understand anything. To her relief, she saw her husband's car in the parking lot near the office and sighed with relief. Cameron is such a strange person. He must have wanted to work, so he took Abby and her wardrobe just in case, she thought. Melody quickly climbed the stairs. At the entrance to the office, she was met by the guard. Melody showed her pass. The man seemed flustered. "Michael, what's wrong?" she asked. "Melody, I'm sorry, but your pass is invalid," he replied. "What do you mean?" Melody was surprised. "I've only been away for 3 weeks. I'm still on vacation, but that doesn't mean my pass is invalid." "But it is. It's the new owner's order. You've been fired. I've been instructed not to let you into the office." "What nonsense. Why didn't I know about this? And my husband didn't say anything to me. This must be some mistake." "There's no mistake, and your husband, Melody, forgive me, but he's a very bad person." "Michael, what are you saying?" "I know what I'm saying, but I can't disclose all the details to you. I'm sorry again. My job is more important to me." "But my husband is in the office right now. I saw his car in the parking lot. Let me in, please. I need to understand what's going on. Michael, I can't reach him on the phone." "I can't help you with that." "Fine, I'll deal with the dismissal later. Just tell me, did Cameron come alone? Was there a little girl with him?" The guard's eyebrows shot up and a silly smile appeared on his face. "No, there definitely wasn't a little girl with him." "Why are you laughing?" Melody shouted angrily. She realized that she wouldn't get anything here and decided to wait for her husband outside. Melody left the building and sat on a bench near the parking lot. Her head was spinning. What happened during those 3 hours while she was with her father? Where was Abby? What was wrong with Cameron? And why all of a sudden did she find out she was fired? No, that silly guard definitely messed everything up. She'll deal with him later and he'll be begging her for forgiveness. Then Cameron appeared in the office doorway. Melody wanted to rush towards him, but she froze in place. She saw Cameron holding the door for a hefty woman in an expensive suit. Then he took her by the arm, and they headed towards the parking lot. Melody recognized the woman as Mrs. Crooks, Maria. Melody hid behind a small living hedge, so the two of them didn't notice her, and they were chatting animatedly. "I'm glad, dear, that you finally decided to sort out this matter with the girl. You've been acting so strange lately," Melody heard Maria's voice. "And I'm so glad, Maria. I've been thinking for so long about how to get rid of her." And then the Child Protective Services showed up on their own. They said they found out we had Constance's child, and they came to take her away pending investigation. So I quickly packed up this girl's things, documents, handed them all over, and sent them on their way. Let them take her to the orphanage. "How long can I tolerate that brat in my house?" Cameron replied. "Aren't you sorry for her? She's your own daughter," Maria asked. "For heaven's sake, Maria, why would I need a child from some drunkard? It was just a moment of weakness." I felt sorry for her, and Melody said the child had nothing to do with it, so I took her in, but only temporarily. And then I see Melody acting like she's the mother, but it can't go on like this. "What do I need all this for when I have you?" Cameron responded. "Oh, you're so sweet," Maria giggled. "By the way, it's time for you and your wife to decide something. I've already fired her from her job. She needs to be removed from your life. I don't want to be second fiddle, you understand, don't you?" Before Cameron could say anything, Melody approached them. Maria noticed her first. "And here's Melody herself." Maria smirked. "Cameron, what's going on? What did I just hear? Explain," Melody demanded. "Darling, eavesdropping is improper," Maria replied. "But if you really want to know, then listen." And she explained that she and Cameron had been together for almost 3 weeks. Almost immediately after she took over as the boss. They love each other, they have big plans for the future, and Melody, she's just getting in the way of their happiness. Maria was narrating, and Cameron stood nearby, calmly looking Melody in the eyes, without a hint of remorse. He even smiled faintly and stroked his lover's hand. It was sickening for Melody to hear and watch all of this. It felt like she was in a nightmare. How could her husband turn out to be such a villain? "So, you've been seeing someone else all this time and then coming to me and our daughter?" Melody said, swallowing a lump in her throat. "Monstrous. You lied to me, looking me straight in the eyes. How could you do this, Cameron? And about the firing?" "It turns out it's true, and I thought the security guard made a mistake. Did you know about it and stayed silent? Moreover, Cameron himself asked me to fire you. Why would we want to see you at the firm? And here's a convenient opportunity. You're gone. My husband didn't even get a chance to sign your resignation letter. And I certainly didn't sign it. You want to take a break? Take it. I fired you for absenteeism, that's all." "What absenteeism?" Cameron, why are you silent? I was with your daughter. This is despicable. And most importantly, who took Abby? Why are you bothering me with Abby? Unexpectedly snapped Cameron. She was taken by Child Protective Services, as expected. I thought they would take her away from us when we first arrived from the village. But no, we got stuck with some overly kind idiot at CPS, so I had to play the role of a father. Didn't want to stir up trouble. Constance could have started asserting her rights, demanded a DNA test, and then we would have to pay her full support. But she settled for $2,000 a month and was happy. You said you paid her more, Melody said, bewildered. I always knew you were a naive fool. You believe anything. And then Constance went to the other side. Now no one can say the child is mine. My mother? She's a drunk, not reliable. You? Who's going to listen to you? And I never intended to acknowledge this brat, and then everything fell into place. You went to your dear old dad, and CPS showed up. So I said I was just in friendly terms with Constance. That's why I was watching over the kid. And no one bothered to check that piece of paper. That's it. Freedom. I found a place for your Abby. Don't doubt it. Where's the girl now? Don't know. In some shelter. Oh, and one more thing. Now that you know everything, I have a huge favor to ask. Please, by evening, just vacate the apartment. What do you mean? Melody exclaimed. The apartment was bought by both of us on mortgage, and we paid the down payment from the money my father gave us. What are you talking about? Cameron smirked. And where is it documented that your father gave us money for the mortgage? There's nothing, no paper. And in courts, they don't trust words. It's your apartment, right? How will you pay for it? Forgot that you're unemployed now, so vacate my apartment by the evening when I come back from Maria's. By the way, I'll file for divorce myself. Where will you get the money to pay the court fees? I can't believe I once believed in you, Melody whispered barely audibly. She turned around and walked away, and behind her the two of them, laughing smugly, got into Cameron's car. Melody returned to the apartment, not knowing what to do. She wanted to rush out immediately to look for Abby, but she remembered Cameron's words. There was no strength to stay in this apartment. Melody packed her suitcase, glanced back at the threshold, and smiled. She had once left before, back when Constance showed up on their doorstep. Melody had forgiven and forgotten everything then, and for what? Or was it not in vain? After all, otherwise, she would never have met the sweet little girl Abby. Thoughts of the girl stabbed at Melody's heart. Where is this little girl now? No, Melody will definitely find her and do everything to get the girl back. She couldn't betray her, even if her own father did. When Melody appeared at her father's doorstep, Roll immediately sensed that something terrible had happened. Something with Abby? He asked. And with Abby as well. His daughter burst into tears and told him everything that had happened. Within a few hours, Melody's life had turned completely upside down, and she didn't know what to do next. Roll and Mabel listened to her, then comforted her and thought about how to help. Her father suggested suing the employer, but this idea was dismissed immediately. Melody wouldn't be able to prove anything, as the company had good lawyers, and Maria, determined to destroy her rival, had clearly taken precautions. Filing a lawsuit against Cameron over the apartment dispute wouldn't work either. After all, Melody was now unemployed. Yes, Cameron was right. She wouldn't be able to pay the mortgage. We need to try to get Abby back, Melody decided. Her father and stepmother were skeptical. They doubted that Abby would be returned. This could be fought for if the child was theirs. But who was Abby to Melody? Just a stranger's child. Nevertheless, Melody decided to at least find out where the girl had been taken. A couple of days later, feeling slightly calmer, she began her search. The authorities refused to talk to her, despite Melody's pleas and appeals. So she began visiting the city's shelters day by day. There were several, but not too many. At each one, she simply walked around, waiting for the children to be taken out for a walk, and carefully scanned the area for her daughter over the fence. She had no luck in 3 shelters, but in the 4th, fortune smiled upon her. Approaching the orphanage when the youngest group was out for a walk, the children were noisy and playing. Occasionally, the teacher would scold them sternly. Suddenly, Melody noticed a girl sitting in a gazebo, away from the others. She squinted and her heart skipped a beat. It was Abby. Melody wanted to call out to her, but at the last moment, she realized it would only make things worse. She'd either be chased away or the police would be called. Besides, Abby might get upset. Just then, two women emerged from the orphanage gates. Melody overheard a snippet of their conversation. The women, apparently kitchen workers, were lamenting the increased workload because the dishwasher had quit, leaving them to do her job for a pittance. Melody decided to approach the orphanage director. She told the guard at the entrance that she was there about a job. He let her in and directed her where to go. In the director's office, a woman listened to Melody. "And you want to work here?" she asked incredulously. "The dishwasher's salary is $1,000 a month. It's laughable. And you, a young woman, I don't believe you can't find another job. You're dressed decently. You even have a manicure. What kind of dishwasher are you?" Melody realized that her plan had completely failed. Biting her lip in despair, she then burst into tears and told Mrs. Leese, the superintendent, the whole truth. About her husband's betrayal, about how he got rid of the girl whom Melody was ready to call her daughter. "So our new girl is your Abby?" Mrs. Leese asked thoughtfully. "Yes, she's not an easy child. Often cries, doesn't make contact with anyone. She's under stress, you see." Melody wiped her tears. "She was the same when we took her from the village, but then we quickly established a connection. Abby is very smart and advanced for her age. She's just been let down several times, that's why she's prickly like a cactus, but she can be approached." "So you want to work here to communicate with the girl?" "Yes," Melody confessed honestly. "I understand that nobody will give her to me now. I don't have the conditions or the salary, but I simply love this girl." "Oh dear," sighed the superintendent. "Relatives don't need children, but strangers are ready to give everything away to take care of them. What should I do with you? I'm not a monster. I see that you're sincere with me now. Let's do this." And Mrs. Leese offered Melody a job at the shelter, but not as a dishwasher, but as a caregiver. Yes, the salary was also low, but she could communicate with Abby. "Just don't single her out among the other children," warned Mrs. Leese. "You must treat all the children equally, and Abby will see and calm down, understand that she's not abandoned, and gradually get used to her new life." "Will I ever be able to adopt her?" "Why not? Time will tell," the superintendent replied evasively. On the first day when Melody started her job, Abby, seeing her, froze, then blinked, ran up and grabbed her sleeve. "Miss Melody?" she said, tears welling up. "Yes, darling," Melody replied, squatting down in front of the girl. "Don't cry, my little one. I'll always be here now. Don't cry." The girl calmed down a bit and hugged her. Watching her, other children also leaned towards their new caregiver. Melody had to hug each of them in turn. Her heart was torn apart, looking into their eyes filled with hope. Maybe this miss would love him her exactly. Yes, the superintendent was right. She couldn't single out one child. In the future, Melody tried not to openly show her feelings towards Abby and could only sneak treats into Abby's pocket, stroke her head, or give her a kiss. So a month had passed. During this time, Melody received divorce papers, appeared in court, and reclaimed her maiden name. She had only seen Cameron once in court during this time. He appeared confident, smirked at Melody, and at one point she even spotted him with the new owner of the company, Maria, waiting for him by the car. Melody noted to herself what an unpleasant woman Maria was. Too plump, too brazen, and much older than Cameron. What had he seen in her? Money. Yes, he clearly set his sights on her millions. What was he before Mr. Crooks? Just a department head. But with Maria, he could become a manager. Melody also learned that Mr. Crooks had passed away suddenly. Julia, whom Melody had once randomly encountered on the street, informed her of this. At first, Julia apologized for not informing her earlier about what was happening at the company, about Melody's dismissal. "Understand nobody wants to lose their job," Julia explained, avoiding eye contact. So everyone kept silent. But your Cameron, as soon as Maria appeared in the office, started to orbit around her. And she needed that, and she couldn't care less that her husband was dying. He passed away a week ago. There's gossip around the office that Cameron has already proposed to her. That's how things are. And how about you, dear? Fine, Melody attempted to smile. Living with my parents, working. Where? Oh, here and there, Melody replied vaguely. She knew she had to be careful with Julia. She was quite the gossip. Even without intending to, she would unravel everything, and it would eventually reach Cameron. And when he realized why Melody had taken a poorly paid job at the shelter, he might try to cause trouble for her, do everything to separate her from Abby. No, he didn't need his daughter, but just out of spite. Now, anything could be expected from Cameron. Melody continued to work at the shelter. Yes, she understood she needed to do something. Being a caregiver wasn't the limit of her dreams, and with such income, Abby would never be given to her. But to find another job, she needed to leave the shelter, and Melody couldn't abandon Abby now. One morning before the start of the workday, Mrs. Lease called Melody to her office. The superintendent looked very upset. She gestured for Melody to sit down and began to speak. Melody, do you remember our conversation at the very beginning of your work? I told you not to single out Abby. Yes, I remember, and I'm trying not to, Melody said. Exactly, try. But it's not working out well. Do you know what happened yesterday? Abby threw a tantrum before bedtime. She demanded that only you put her to bed because you are her mom. You love her, stroke her head, and give her chocolates. Other children listening to her also started crying. The caregiver could barely calm them down. No, I might have believed that the girl just made it all up, but caregivers have repeatedly found various sweets under her pillow. So you really are giving the girl more attention than necessary. Understand, this is a children's home. You can't single out someone here. Mrs. Lease, I understand everything, but Abby is closer to me than the others. I can't help it, Melody barely whispered. Forgive me. I'll try not to do it anymore. No need to try harder, Melody. You're fired, Mrs. Lease said sharply. But how is this possible, Mrs. Lease? Please, no. Give me another chance. Understand, Abby feels better when I'm around. Melody said, almost in tears. I beg you, put yourself in my shoes. I love this girl very much, but I can't take her away. You yourself understand that with the income here, no one will give her to me. Give me a couple more months, let me work. Abby will calm down completely, and then I'll leave, find a new job, and file for adoption. And you've planned everything? Mrs. Lee smirked. No, my dear, it won't work like that. And about adoption. Are you sure you'll get the girl? You're divorced, living with your parents, and will you find a high-paying job? It's still unclear. Abby needs a complete family, and maybe we can help her if you don't worry the child. That's it. Leave. May I at least say goodbye to Abby? Melody pleaded. Absolutely not. After yesterday's tantrum, Abby is in the infirmary, and she'll stay there until you leave the orphanage, Mrs. Lease said sharply. And then there was a knock on the door. A young man entered the office. Hello, Mrs. Lease, he said confidently, stepping forward. Sorry for dropping by unannounced. I was passing through. Derek, good morning. Glad to see you. The superintendent beamed, hurriedly getting up from her desk and heading towards him, glancing at Melody and curtly saying, Melody, our conversation is over. Melody approached the door, looked at the guest and froze, and the man also stood there in amazement.
Melody? He exclaimed. Thompson, is that you?
Derek Joy, well, I'll be damned. Melody, it's so good to see you. Derek laughed, approaching Melody and lifting her up in his arms. I never expected to run into you here. Derek, put me down, you'll drop me, Melody laughed. I am so heavy. You heavy? You've always been a feather, Derek chuckled, finally setting her down and turning to the bewildered Mrs. Lease. This is my classmate, childhood friend. Haven't seen each other in years. Oh, I see. The superintendent smiled awkwardly. A pleasant surprise indeed. Melody working as a caregiver for us. A caregiver? Derek asked, confused. I didn't get that. Melody, if I remember correctly, you enrolled in economics. Did you not finish? How come? I graduated from university, and with honors, Melody said with a sad smile. It's just how things turned out. Well, that's very interesting. Melody, will you tell me everything later? Can I have a word with Mrs. Lease? Will you wait for me in the reception? Derek asked. Of course. She nodded in response. And then, sitting in the reception area, she waited for Derek and reminisced. She and Derek were classmates, very close friends. When Melody's mother died, Derek understood her like no one else. His parents died in a car accident when he was only 7. Derek lived with his grandmother. He supported Melody after her mother's death. Sometimes they even went to the cemetery together and remembered their mothers there. In school, they even sat together until the 8th grade, and then somehow they grew up, became embarrassed around each other. They didn't realize it was their first love. They both remained silent. And only before the prom did Melody decide to talk to Derek, confess her feelings to him. She prepared so much for it, even rehearsed her speech. And then, when there was a disco in the gym, she entered the classroom and there was Derek with her friend Rita. Derek was standing against the wall, and Rita was practically hanging on his shoulders. They were kissing. Seeing this, Melody ran away. She cried at home, hugging a pillow. Derek came to her the next morning, wanting to explain something, talk, but she refused to listen, drove him away. And then Rita called and told her that she and Derek had done everything that night. Melody cried for several more days, then gathered herself, started preparing for university entrance exams. But after that incident, she never had friends again. And she didn't let boys get close to her. Only then with Cameron did it seem real. As it turned out, it was only an illusion. And Derek? Melody knew little about him. After school, he couldn't immediately get into university. And then? Well, it didn't matter anymore. Melody had Cameron. But now, seeing Derek, she somehow felt so happy. There was no resentment towards him anymore. He was just a friend from the past, the best one, the most genuine. Derek stepped out of the office, smiled at Melody. "Well, dear friend, shall we catch up?" They left the orphanage and went to a small cafe. Over a cup of tea, Derek talked about himself. Eventually, he managed to enroll in law school, graduated, got married, and then tragedy struck. His wife died. She was hit by a drunk driver at a pedestrian crossing while 7 months pregnant. The culprit was prosecuted, of course. But would that bring back his wife and child? Others might have turned to alcohol, but not Derek. He decided to leave law and start a business. Perhaps he was just lucky. His business took off quickly. Clients and investors appeared. And now, his company had weight in the market. People took notice. Melody shared about herself, her work, her husband's betrayal, and why she ended up working as a caregiver at the orphanage. "So you worked for my competitor's company, and I didn't even know." "It seems so," nodded Melody. "I heard about your company, but I never imagined you were in charge there. Surprising." "Yes, surprising," agreed Derek, looked thoughtfully at Melody, and suddenly asked, "Do you remember our school years?" "Of course." "And the prom?" "And the prom, although I'd rather not remember that." "Me too," Derek admitted. "I was planning to tell you something important then. I was waiting for you in the classroom, and then Rita came in, hung on me, started kissing me. Then I saw you standing in the doorway. I got so flustered, and then Rita and the champagne hit me. I decided not to chase after you, but in the morning, I came. I remembered your eyes in the classroom, realized what I'd done, wanted to fix it all, but you drove me away. Rita told me then that you two had something going on," Melody said with a sad smile. "There was nothing. We danced at the disco later and I went home." They looked at each other. "Melody, we were so foolish. Why didn't we talk openly back then?" "I don't know," she replied. They were silent for a while, then Derek sighed and nodded. "Well, what's done is done. But now I won't just leave you like this. The superintendent told me you want to adopt a girl, but there are difficulties. Is that true?" "Right now, no one will give her to me. I won't even be able to see her now. Mrs. Lease fired me." "How did you come to that conclusion? She praised you so much. You were practically the best employee there. No, she definitely didn't fire you. Probably she realized who you know." "Who do I know, apart from the owner of a large trading company?" Melody asked. "A benefactor and sponsor," Derek said with a sad smile. "As I became more successful, I made a promise to myself to help those who are struggling now. I oversee this orphanage. I bring them groceries, equipment, help with money, and I also help the House of Mercy and the animal shelter. That's it. You have a kind heart. It's not about that. I just believe that if I have the ability to help, then I'm obligated to do so. That's all. And now I understand that you and this poor little girl need my help the most. Derek, but no one will give her to me now. They will if you have a good job and if you get married, Derek continued. I don't understand. Why don't you understand, Thompson? I'm proposing to marry you. Derek laughed, then became serious. I'm inviting you to marry me fictitiously, not forcing myself on you. We'll just live together, that's all. Surely they'll give the child to a married woman with a good salary, and I have a nice house, 2 floors. I think the guardianship will like it. Derek, are you proposing this to me just like that? We haven't seen each other for so many years. But I remember you, and I think you do too, and our meeting isn't accidental. Anyway, I'm not forcing you. Decide for yourself. By the way, I didn't mention the job. Will you come to work in my economics department? I need a senior specialist there. Melody could only blink in disbelief. She couldn't believe how everything in her life could change so drastically in just a few minutes. Derek, thank you. You're saving me and Abby too, but we don't love each other. Maybe there were feelings between us back in school that we never confessed to each other. But now everything's different. We're adults, we each had our own lives. Derek, I'm afraid it won't work out for us. If it doesn't, we'll divorce, Derek calmly replied. I'm telling you, let's get married fictitiously. Time will tell. I think it's all perfectly thought out. You'll have a decent job, the girl with you, and a wonderful husband by your side. And I, by the way, will benefit too. You cook well, don't you? I'll save on a chef. You joker, Melody laughed. And how? Derek winked. Got the documents? Let's go file the application. So unexpectedly, that day, Melody became a bride again. When Roel found out that his daughter was getting married again, he was furious. Where was she rushing to? Melody convinced him that this marriage was just a formality. She needed to get Abby out of the shelter. Moreover, the groom was known to her father, that very Derek, her classmate. I remember that classmate of yours, Roel grumbled. You ran away from the prom back then, and then cried. Do you think we didn't see that and we just didn't interfere? Dad, Derek and I cleared everything up about that evening. We were both foolish. We should have clarified everything right away, but we each showed our stubbornness. That's all. And why am I justifying myself to you? I'm a grown woman. I have the right to decide how to act. Make sure you don't end up crying again like after that prom. The father frowned, but Mabel, on the contrary, supported Melody. I think everything will work out for you, and not just fictitiously, she winked. And then everything started moving so quickly. Melody joined Derek's company, prepared for the wedding. At first, she wanted them to just sign the papers, but Derek insisted that everything should look real, so there were dresses, restaurants, guests, everything. Meanwhile, Melody went to the orphanage every day to see Abby. Mrs. Leese was now okay with them communicating. I'll take you home soon, Melody whispered to the girl. And you'll be my mommy again? Abby asked, pressing her cheek against Melody's. Again and forever, the woman smiled. Sometimes Derek also went to the orphanage with Melody to talk to the girl. They quickly found a connection. And occasionally, the girl already called Derek Dad. And then there was the wedding. It turned out to be very lavish, written about in local newspapers. Everyone admired what a beautiful couple they were. A journalist dug up the story of the bride and groom's acquaintance from their school days. Childhood acquaintances reunited. So romantic. And after the wedding, Melody and Derek realized that there would be no fictitious marriage between them. Their childhood feelings suddenly flared up with new force, transformed, and turned into true love. Only now did Melody realize that she had loved Derek all her life, and Cameron in her life was just a mistake. But if it weren't for Cameron, she wouldn't have her wonderful daughter now. Abby's guardianship was handed over without any problems, and the three of them became a real, strong family. Only one thing worried Melody. She still hadn't told Derek about her health problems. She was afraid. But eventually, it all worked out. Derek listened to her and then said that it changed nothing between them. Yes, they would seek help from the best clinics in the country, but if that didn't help, they already had Abby. What more did they need? A year had passed. Melody was working at Derek's firm. Things were going great. Abby attended daycare, and in her free time she enjoyed swimming and drawing. Maria's company was no competition for Derek's firm. It remained far behind. And lately, judging by the ratings, things there were getting worse and worse. Melody sometimes glanced at such information, just out of curiosity. She knew that Maria also ran the company, and Cameron, as he had dreamed, became the manager. But clearly it wasn't doing any good. Then one day, Melody received a call from an unknown number. From the first word, she knew who she was talking to. Cameron, Melody was surprised. What do you want?
Yeah, just wanted to know how you're doing. Heard you got married.
Yeah, I did. Melody, let's meet up. I have a business proposition for you. Business? She smirked. All business is at work. Come by, we'll talk. No, let's go to a cafe. It's very important. Trust me, it's important for you too. I have an excellent offer for you. Melody felt nothing for her ex-husband. Well, maybe she did resentment. Even her happy marriage with Derek didn't heal the pain from how Cameron treated her. Betrayals, treachery, and essentially theft. After all, he used Melody's father's money to buy an apartment, then kicked her out. And now he dared to call her and offer something. In the first second after hearing his last sentence, Melody wanted to tell him off, but she stopped herself. Let's meet, she replied as indifferently as possible. It was just curious what this scoundrel could offer, how he would look her in the eye. They met. Cameron looked guilty, constantly sighing and sadly looking at Melody. He timidly handed her a bouquet of roses. She took the flowers indifferently and asked why he called her. And then Cameron broke down. He began to swear his love to Melody. Melody, I've realized everything. I understand that I hurt you. I've been tormented, suffering without you all this time. Really? She chuckled. You may not believe me, be angry with me. But I know you love me too. You got married out of spite toward me. But you can't live without me either. Melody, we should be together. How do you imagine that? I'm married, you're married. You married your Maria, didn't you? I did, but that doesn't mean anything, Melody. Everything can be fixed, I know how. Melody decided to play along. She smiled at Cameron, touched his hand. I knew you'd come back. My dear Melody. He took her hand and began to kiss it, and Melody smiled, although she wanted to slap Cameron. She realized that Cameron didn't just ask to meet her out of nowhere and was now pretending to be in love. He needed something from her. Melody already understood that, so she discreetly turned on the recorder on her phone. Cameron, I agree with you. We made mistakes. I feel terrible without you. But what do we do now? We're not free, Melody sadly said. And my new husband, he's a very influential person. He can destroy us, leave us with nothing. Cameron, I don't want to live in poverty. My dear, I've thought of everything. You have access to your husband's accounts, to all his business affairs. You'll leak me all the information. I have good computer specialists, they'll help. We'll transfer all the money from your husband's accounts to offshore and leave this country. Melody will be happy. And your wife? What about her? I can't stand looking at her, a fat cow. She's stupid too. I've had control over all the company's affairs for a long time. I've already prepared most of the funds to transfer to my accounts. Her father is the only one getting in my way. The old fool just won't die. What can you do about that? Ha, I can do a lot. I've already swapped his medication a month ago. He'll croak soon, I'm sure. And then we'll do everything. And we'll leave, my love. Melody listened to Cameron and couldn't believe that this monster was once her husband. But why did he suddenly tell her everything now? It was simple. There must have been another plan. Melody smirked and then suddenly asked, "And what will you do with me afterwards?" Melody, what are you talking about? We'll leave together and live happily. I don't believe it, she shook her head. Cameron, you only love yourself. And what you're offering me now is just part of your plan. You clearly intend to get rid of me. You're wrong. I love you and I always have. Really loved me, huh? So much that in one day you ruined my life, took everything away, even our child? You didn't care about my feelings. Not then, not now. I don't believe you. By the way, don't you want to know how Abby is doing? Abby? Yes, Abby. Your daughter. I don't consider her my daughter. But I do. Derek and I adopted her and Abby lives with us. She's a very smart and talented girl. I see. Derek and I. So you deliberately called me out for this confession? What scum you are. My teacher was good. She smiled and got up from the table. It was interesting to hear you, enlightening. In conclusion, I want to say that I love my real husband. I feel sorry for your Maria, but I despise you. Everything you heard here is a lie. You won't prove anything, Cameron shouted after her. Melody just waved her hand at him and left, and in her pocket lay a phone with a recording on. She walked away, smiling. She had such leverage over Cameron. She needed to think about how to use it. But at home, another surprise awaited her. Derek told her that there would be a meeting at the town hall tomorrow where businessmen were invited, followed by a reception. We're going together, Derek said. By the way, Cameron and Maria will be there too. I saw the guest lists. Melody, I understand you find this unpleasant, but all the wives will be there, so we have to go. Honestly, I don't understand why they were invited. Things are getting worse for them. Perhaps Maria's father is trying to support his daughter somehow. He probably thinks the city government will pay attention to them and provide some grant for development, but I doubt it. So Cameron and Maria will be there. Melody smirked. Will the police be there? Are you planning to take them down or something? Derek joked. Darling, don't stoop so low, they'll punish themselves. But we can help them a little, Melody said, and she told him about meeting Cameron, about their conversation. Then she played the recording from the dictaphone. What a scoundrel, Derek exclaimed. He's robbing his wife, poisoning his father-in-law, trying to deceive me, and swearing love to you. Melody, I'm upset that you met with this scumbag. What are you trying to achieve? I want him to answer for his actions. Yes, you're right, we need to go to the police. Derek reached for the phone, but Melody suggested another, more effective option. These recordings are not enough. We need to prove even more that it's real, and Cameron needs to expose himself. You just want revenge, Derek bitterly chuckled. Melody, do you still feel something for him? No, why would I? Melody exclaimed. Only when I met you again did I realize that before I wasn't living, just existing. But he hurt me deeply. And I'm also upset for Abby. He never once called her his daughter, even when we lived together, just the girl. Does it matter what he called her? Abby is now my daughter and yours too. That's true, but I still want to put him in his place, to make him realize that he's not the smartest one, that there are consequences for him too. Okay, darling, I'll play along. And the next day a grand scandal erupted in the city. In the large hall of the town hall, there was a meeting between city officials and businessmen, followed by a luncheon to discuss matters in a more informal setting. Melody watched Cameron from the start. He was with Maria. Since the last time Melody saw her, Maria had become even thicker and aged significantly, and Cameron was by her side, like a faithful dog. He would bring her champagne, sandwiches. He smiled at his wife, whispered something in her ear. From the outside, it might seem like they loved each other very much. Several times Melody caught Cameron's glances full of anger and fear. Anger because she refused to support his plan, and fear that Melody might tell something. Maria also noticed her former rival and threw disdainful glances in her direction. At one point, the mayor came out and gave a speech about how businessmen were doing a great service for the city's development and expressed his pleasure that today the most worthy and successful people had gathered in this hall, who would continue to do everything for the benefit of the people. And then Melody raised her hand and stepped forward. She asked for the floor. Of course, the event hosts were a bit surprised but handed her the microphone. Maria, upon seeing Melody, opened her mouth, and Cameron froze in place. Thank you for giving me the floor, Melody said nervously. But I'd like to correct our mayor a little. Excuse me, Mr. Masterson said that the most worthy were gathered here today. Unfortunately, not everyone here is so deserving. Just yesterday, I had an interesting conversation with my ex-husband. I suspected something was amiss, so I went to meet him with a recorder. Anyway, I won't retell everything. Here's the recording. Have a listen. Melody held the phone up to the microphone and played yesterday's recording. Everyone in the room listened to what Cameron was saying. Soon, murmurs spread through the crowd. Everyone was wondering whose voice it was, and then Cameron couldn't take it anymore. "Shut up!" he shouted and lunged at Melody with his fists. "It's not true, it's a lie!" Derek intercepted him. Police officers quickly arrived and apprehended Cameron, who kept struggling and yelling threats at Melody. Then Maria approached him. "Is this true, Cameron? Is this how you repay me for making you a man?" she asked. "It's true, daughter," a voice was heard from the crowd. Everyone parted, allowing an elderly man with a cane to pass through. It was Maria's father, Mr. Fuller. The old man explained that Derek had called him yesterday, suspecting that his son-in-law was poisoning him. Mr. Fuller didn't believe it at first, but sent his pills for express analysis. The results came today. There was a small amount of poison in the pills, gradually bringing Mr. Fuller closer to death. "I came straight here from the lab," the old man declared. "I wanted to look this scoundrel in the eye. Derek told me his wife wanted to publicly expose the criminal. I thought it was all in vain, but it turns out it wasn't. Cameron, you're a criminal, do you understand?" Cameron blushed, whimpering something. The police escorted him out of the hall. Everyone present quietly conversed, discussing what had happened. Melody approached Derek and whispered with a smile, "It turned out pretty well." "Not bad, just not sure what comes next," Derek replied quietly. "Will our actions be approved or condemned? Maybe we should have quietly gone to the police?" Then the mayor spoke up. "Dear friends, we are all a bit shocked right now, but I believe everyone will agree with me that there are heroic people among us. Melody, you weren't afraid to speak out publicly against a criminal. Thank you for opening our eyes to this person." And everyone applauded. Melody saw Maria. She was sitting in the corner of the hall next to her father, crying. Melody suddenly remembered how Maria used to laugh at her in the parking lot while she cried. Now they had swapped roles, but Melody didn't feel any joy from this. She felt sorry for this unhappy woman. When Derek and Melody headed for the exit, Mr. Fuller called out to them. He rose with difficulty from the couch and extended his hand, first to Derek, then to Melody. "Thank you," the old man said. "You opened our eyes to someone we thought was our own, but turned out to be a wolf in sheep's clothing. And Melody, forgive us for everything. I know my daughter caused you pain, but she's just a foolish, love-struck woman. Now she'll rethink a lot." Melody silently nodded in response. "I'm sorry," Maria whispered to her. "And you forgive," Melody replied. Derek and Melody stepped out onto the street. It was early spring, bright sunlight dazzled their eyes, and a warm wind tousled their hair. Melody was in a good mood, but Derek walked pensively. "What's wrong?" Melody asked, surprised. "Everything turned out well." "Huh? Yeah," Derek responded. "What are you thinking about, dear?" "Oh, just talked to the trade minister," Derek said. "They want to redirect the Chinese to us. Do you think we'll handle the new order?" "Of course we will," Melody confidently nodded. "But what surprises me is when did you have time to talk about business? I think I ruined all your negotiations today." "Nothing of the sort," Derek laughed. "A true professional can handle anything. A hurricane, an earthquake, an offended wife." "Offended, but I'm the happiest. Now let's go home. Abby is waiting for us. Let's go." They hugged and walked to the car. Another month passed, and everything seemed to be going well for Melody and Derek, both at work and at home. However, Melody started feeling strange in the mornings, and she had her first suspicions. Lost in her thoughts, she dashed to the pharmacy for a pregnancy test. It was unbelievable, but suddenly the test showed 2 lines. Melody waited for the right moment to share this news with Derek, but he was busy with Chinese partners, contracts, and other matters. One evening during dinner, Derek remembered that they needed to go to the cemetery to tidy up the graves of their relatives. "I also think we need to get your mom a new monument. What do you think?" he asked. Yes, that's a good idea, Melody replied, lost in thought. Darling, is something bothering you? Derek inquired. No, I'm just thinking. You know, I used to visit the cemetery very often before, Melody said. Yeah, I used to go there with you in our childhood, Derek recalled. Exactly, and it's been a year since I last went there. All these chores, responsibilities. Even Dad and Mabel were there at her grave last time. I completely forgot about Mom. Melody sighed. Why forgot? You just grew up. You have your own earthly life. It's normal. But don't worry. We'll go there in a few days, see what's what. Derek reassured her. I won't go this time, Derek, Melody said sadly. Then her eyes sparkled, and she smiled. I can't go to the cemetery now. There's a superstition. What superstition? Derek asked, surprised. It seems we're going to have a baby, Melody announced. Melody, my Melody, Derek exclaimed, picking up his beloved in his arms. Careful, you'll drop me? Melody laughed. I'll always hold you, my girl. Suddenly, they heard Abby sobbing. The little girl had been sitting at the table watching her parents all this time. Abby, what's wrong? Derek and Melody said in unison. Mom said she's going to have a baby. What about me? Am I not needed by you now? Abby asked tearfully. What are you talking about, sweetheart? Melody laughed. You're my favorite girl. You're both my favorite girls, Derek replied with a smile. Come here, daughter. And picking up both of them, Derek spun them around in his arms while Melody and Abby laughed merrily, not afraid at all, because with such a husband and father, nothing in this life is scary. After this incident, a criminal case was opened against Cameron. He was tried and sentenced to several years in prison. They said he was serving his sentence in a prison not far from where he was born. No one visited him except for one old lady. Melody realized it was Mrs. Hanson's mother. She was still alive then. And it turned out that her wayward son was only needed by her.